We're going to begin with a moment of silent reflection for the first responders. This will be followed by an invocation by Rabbi Michael Bernholtz of Temple Beth Shalom, and then the Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Joseph Flesher. Please rise.
In Ecclesiastes 3, we hear just simple words that there is a time to speak and a time to keep silent. As we take those moments of silence to honor and to remember all of the work of our first responders, I also have this opportunity to come to teach and to offer prayer as we get ready for this meeting of our county commission. And I'm actually going to start, and I'm going to teach. That's kind of what I do. I teach and then I pray. Do I have fans of Star Trek here? Okay, so what do all of you know from Star Trek? Live long and how many can do it? Okay, so live long and prosper. You all have seen that before, right? And the question is, where did that come from? And that is an incredible piece and part of what I share with you this morning.
Vulcan. Vulcan.
It does not come from Vulcan. It goes further back than that. Actually goes to the book of Numbers. It goes to this week's Torah portion because incredibly enough, Leonard Nimoy, who's the actor who plays the character of Spock, who comes from Vulcan, is very proud of his rich Jewish heritage. And when he was approached by Gene Roddenberry as they were working on this character of Spock, they said we wanted something to come from a place of deep wisdom, from a deep place of deep logic, from a place of deep mysticism, of deep ritual. And what did Leonard Nimoy remember? He remembered going to synagogue with his, and I don't remember if it was father or grandfather, and being there in services and seeing as part of the ritual, Birkat Kohanim. And so this is the ritual before the prayer for peace, or as part of the prayer for peace, where those who are the Kohanim, who are descendants of the priests of ancient Israel, come forward with their prayer shawls over them so you can't see who they are, and stand before the congregation, and they lift up their hands, and they say these words, Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, may God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha, may God's light shine upon you and bring your grace forth for you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God's presence turn towards you and that presence fill you with shalom. And Leonard Nimoy remembers being a little kid and going and seeing that ritual, how reverent it was, how powerful it was, how incredible it was. And what did he do when he was asked to play Spock from Vulcan, this place where they worked with reason, where they worked with knowledge, where they said, we are going to be caretakers of our world. What is the ritual? What is a good greeting to come from that place? And that was the ritual he remembered. And so when you say, live long and prosper, he's tapping into that Jewish value. And if you've seen Fiddler on the Roof, l'chaim, to life. And so I stand here before you and I offer that blessing, but I do so with more than just a little bit of history and a little bit of pop culture and Star Trek. Because if you actually look at the placement of my hands, there's something more important that's there. The rabbis teach that when you hold your hands in this position, what you're actually doing is not your hands, it's the space between your hands. It's not just what we can do with our bodies, but sometimes the space that we create. And so some of it is the blessings that we can offer, but also some of it is what are the cracks that we open to let the voice of God, to let the light of God in, to let the love and the light of the people around us in. As we stand here ready for this meeting of our county commission, it's so important to realize it's both our voice, what we can add to our community, what we can offer to our county as acts of blessing, as acts of wisdom, as acts of care. But then there's also this incredible point as we gather for a community meeting, what are the spaces we can create for others? How do we hear others? How do we let the light of all of the members of our community forth so we're not just us with our ideas, with our values, but a rich tapestry of so many voices, of so much energy, of so much action and activity, both giving and receiving, that lets our community become to its place of shalom, wholeness, harmony, and peace. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in the pledge of allegiance to the greatest nation on earth, the United States of America, land of the free and home of the brave. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Bernholtz, for that teaching and prayer. We'll now go on to the additions and deletions to the agenda, if there are any. Any additions?
Move to approve as presented.
Second.
We've got a motion to approve by Commissioner O'Brien, second by Commissioner Adams. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. We now move to proclamations and presentations. We have a presentation of a proclamation designating June 17th through June 23rd, 2019 as Amateur Radio Week. Commissioner Zork will present, and it looks like they have most of the club with them. So, Commissioner Zork.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of you could come up to the podium, or all, however you'd like to do it, and I'll read the proclamation, and if you'd like to share a few words, that'd be wonderful. This is a...
I don't think we should begin until everybody gets up to the podium.
Yes,
Okay.
Come on up. Come on up, team.
Much better.
I see they all got the memo of the appropriate shirt to wear.
They were threatened with violence.
All right.
They represent a good cause.
Yes, okay. This is a proclamation designating June 17th through June 23rd, 2019 as Amateur Radio Week. Whereas Indian River County continues to be home to a highly trained and experienced group of amateur radio operators. And whereas the Vero Beach Amateur Radio Club has been designated a special service club by the American Radio Relay League for the second time, always going above and beyond the service requests from the local community. And whereas the Amateur Radio Emergency Service of Indian River County has been trained to provide effective emergency communications and support during times of national, state, and local emergencies. And whereas Indian River County recognizes and appreciates the diligence of these hams who also serve as weather spotters in the Skywarn program of the National Weather Service. And whereas these radio amateurs are always on alert for tornadoes, floods, tropical cyclones, or any other local emergency, and use their communication skills to assist local and state government officials. And whereas Indian River County radio amateurs generously donate their time and equipment to provide communication support to local service clubs, organizations, and charities. And whereas members of the Vero Beach Amateur Radio Club, Inc. will continue to improve their communication skills by operating during the 24-hour emergency simulation known as Field Day on June 22nd and 23rd, 2019. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners, Indian River County, Florida, that June 17th through June 23rd, 2019 be designated as Amateur Radio Week in Indian River County, and the Board calls this observance to the attention of all our citizens. Adopted this 11th day of June 2019, adopted by all 5 county commissioners. Good morning, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, Commissioners. Mr. Zork, thank you. Mr. Solari and Commissioners, on behalf of the members of the Vero Beach Amateur Radio Club, we thank the Indian River County Board of County Commissioners for this proclamation for Field Day 2019. This 2-day event known as Field Day will be held at the Del Mar Condo Clubhouse Banquet Room on A1A. Along with the thousands of ham radio operators across the country, we will be showing off our emergency capabilities on the weekend of June 22nd and 23rd, and the public is invited. You will have the opportunity to meet and talk with ham radio operators of the radio club and see for yourselves what the amateur radio service is all about. Recently, during Hurricanes Matthew and Irma, amateur radio provided communications locally between the Indian Indian River County Shelters and the Emergency Operations Center, and that is part of our mission in Indian River County. We are now a 501c3 nonprofit organization and have grown to over 95 members. The public is cordially invited to come meet and talk with the hams and to see what modern amateur radio can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your service. And I think you might be missing one member that we normally see this time of the year, Dwight Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
and a few others maybe.
And Jim Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
I just want to thank these individuals. To see the way they're retired, they can all be out playing golf, but instead they're honing their skills. And right before the meeting, I reverted back to a time when we first met some of these individuals, and that was during Charlie, Francis, and Jean, when we had lost all of our communication lines or customary communication lines. And quite frankly, I didn't even know what amateur radio was. But I found out that they should be changing their name. We'll get back to that. We lost the Sheriff's Tower. We lost ours. We had direct line communication to the makeshift EOC, but that's all we had. And I had to shift law enforcement over to Vero Beach Police Department. Their tower was unaffected. But that was all the communication we had. No cell phones worked. Cell phones weren't as popular as they are today. And I think Nextel had to bring in the cow, which was a couple of days late. So we truly had no communication. And getting services to our community, getting services, governmental support throughout the state was largely initiated by the amateur radio operators, because they made connections in Jacksonville. They made connections, I think, in Australia that knew somebody in Seminole County. And it was amazing that this amateur radio club, as they call it, should be called the Professional Radio Operators. But they have a rich heritage, and I want to thank them all. And so much so, they're becoming so important that we're working on a training site so that they can hone their skills even further. We don't want to get hit with Charlie, Francis, and Jean. However, we would like to know that they're there, not playing golf and hitting the wires. So thank you so much for all you have done throughout the years during the hurricanes and any other emergency that we're confronted with.
Thank you very much. We thank the board for considering that proposal for us. We really appreciate it.
We're working on it.
Thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
Good morning.
I'll have it on your Facebook. I mean, I could text it to you, or he could text it to you. We got the guys once before.
It's nice to meet you. Thank you.
Wait a second, you're the admin.
Hi. Thank
No
you.
collar on your shirt. Thanks.
Hi. Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning, thanks for coming
Thank
today.
you.
Good morning, thanks for coming.
Hey, Craig, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Well, good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
You got it. You most certainly deserve it.
Don't be afraid of each other.
Stand next to the guy with the yellow shirt.
Hopefully they do radio better than they do pictures.
Yeah, they're,
There you
well, they're
go.
focused.
Everybody on three, ready? 1, 2, 3. Do one more. 1, 2, 3. Here you go. Thanks.
All right.
Congratulations.
And we invite everybody from the radio club to stay for the rest of the meeting.
We'd have an audience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow. That is our only proclamation today, so we will move on to the approval of the minutes.
Move approval.
Second?
We have a motion to approve the regular minutes of April 16th, 2019 from Commissioner Flesher, seconded by Commissioner Zork. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Anybody care to pull anything from the information items? There being none, we'll move on to the
There's one retirement there. I'd like to just acknowledge Michelle Peralt had 40 years of service with the Indian River County Property Appraiser's Office. So 40 years is a good haul, yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle, for your service.
And thank you for the assignment, Mr. Chairman.
You are more than welcome. Have fun with that.
I appreciate it.
Love to send somebody else off on a committee meeting. Moving on to the consent agenda. Anybody from the dais want to pull anything from the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull 8C, please.
8C. And anybody from the audience care to pull anything from the consent agenda for discussion?
Move approval as amended.
Second?
We've got a motion to approve as amended from Commissioner Flesher, seconded by Commissioner Zork. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 8C is the award of the bid for the Oyster Bar Marsh Boardwalks and Observation Piers. And as the board knows, we've kind of made a commitment here the last couple of years to really move forward on some of our conservation lands and putting in the public amenities. And I just want to thank Beth Powell is here, and just want to thank her for her hard work on moving these projects forward. And just want to kind of give her a atta girl for getting us going. And we look forward to its completion. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll move that we approve staff recommendation.
We've got the motion from Commissioner O'Brien, second by Commissioner Adams. And just for discussion, I'll just add thanks to the Indian River Land Trust, because they're vital partners in this, as they were with the Indian River Greenway, which is certainly one of my favorite spots, right off at 8th Street and Indian River Boulevard. The only problem with it right now at this time of year is the mosquitoes are still a little bit out of control. But with that, we will see if there's any other discussion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you. There are no constitutional officers items, so we move on to public items. The first is a public hearing, transmittal hearing, county-initiated request to amend the text of capital improvements element of the county's comprehensive plan to modify certain concurrency management requirements and to update the transportation element to modify certain transportation level of service standards and to remove and replace outdated text, data, and maps. And for one of the last times, we have Mr. Stan Bowling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Still Community Development Director,
But not-
sharing duties with Roland DuBois, Stan Bowling, Community Development. In a moment, I'll turn things over to Bill Shute, our long-range planning chief, to go over the particular amendments, but just a couple of things that I wanted to say. Last December, during the annual capital improvements update, staff brought to you, as part of that update, some need to really change a few things regarding level of service in the capital improvements element and to update items in the transportation element, and you all authorized us to move forward with these particular amendments. A lot of the amendments are updates, and we really appreciate the work of the MPO staff that helped. A lot of the update information is from the 2040 Long-Range Transportation Plan, and we appreciate that. With these amendments, we think that the comprehensive plan will be reasonably up to date until sort of a really comprehensive evaluation and appraisal process, which will start in about 3 years or so. So this will bring most elements, I think, up to date. And with that, I will turn it over to Bill.
Good morning, Commissioners. As mentioned, I'm Bill Shute, Chief of Long Range Planning. And before you today is the request to amend the capital improvements element and the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. Now, with the comprehensive plan amendment process, it involves multiple steps after an application is submitted. As you see on this slide before you, there's a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission. And with this application, that occurred on April 25th. And a recommendation has been made to the board as part of your packet. We are at the transmittal public hearing stage, and that is the second public hearing in which the board decides whether or not to transmit to state and regional review agencies. And once the state and regional review agencies receive, they send their comments to the county and to the state land planning agency. Once those are received, we have a final third public hearing to consider whether to adopt the request or not to. And tentatively, that's scheduled for September, October 2019. And if that is adopted, the amendment is transmitted to the state and regional review agencies and state land planning agency. Now, the purpose of the request, as mentioned, we're looking at both the capital improvements element and the transportation element of the comprehensive plan to recognize changed conditions. And those changed conditions include implementing BCC direction for updating and simplifying the single-family concurrency review procedures, setting interim level of service standards for County Road 510 and 37th Street, certain segments along those streets, updating to incorporate currently adopted long-range transportation plan references, and updating for other related items. Now, we're also looking at this as we have to ensure the policies, objectives, and general text remain up to date with the amendment. So drilling down into the amendment, with respect to the capital improvements element, we looked at some of the policies. Policy 1.12, we corrected a date reference for a year. Policy 3.5, this is where we start to get into the level of service standards and looking at an interim standard for County Road 510 from 66th Avenue to US Highway 1 and 37th Street from US Highway 1 to Indian River Boulevard. The proposal is a change from level service D to D plus 20%, with the caveat that it would revert, the level service would revert back to level service D after planned road improvement projects are completed. And both projects are prioritized and committed but delayed. So with the County Road 510, that's a state-funded project looking 5 to 8 years out roughly for the construction. And 37th Street, of course, we're looking at the alternative for connecting and going all the way up to 41st Street. And that's scheduled in the next 5 years. Now, the text amendments are proposed to exempt all single-family homes, not just pre-1990 lots, from concurrency review on a permit-by-permit basis. So currently, the pre-1990 lots, the platted subdivisions, are considered de minimis impact. And the proposal is to require tracking of single-family permit impacts for incorporation development project traffic studies and staff's annual CIE evaluation, and really to exempt all those single-family homes, not just the pre-1990 lots. So subdivisions going forward from that date, as well as the existing non-platted lots. Now, looking at the transportation element, this is where many of the updates occurred to the text and maps and so forth, and many more policies than the CIE. CIE is updated annually, as you know, with the 5-year schedule of capital improvements. So with the transportation element, we looked at policy 1.1. This is similar to the policy referenced earlier at the CIE, looking at the level of service D plus 20% for the 2 roadways previously mentioned. Policy 1.4, remove building permit approval for single-family development from concurrency review. So again, this is similar to the CIE text amendments previously discussed. Now, under policy 1.4, there's a couple more bullet points. One is to provide the Public Works Director approval to accept traffic capacity special analyses. And there's also a bullet talking about correct the time period of the capital improvement plan from 5 years instead of 7 years. So the 7 years is an older reference when some years ago, we used to look at a 7-year program. Now, policy 1.6 is revised time period for updating traffic impact fee schedule to be consistent with the county's recently modified impact fee ordinance once every 5 years. As you'll recall, this past fall, winter, we updated the ordinance for the impact fees to adjust it to the 5-year time frame for updates. Now, policy 1.7, so some of these are small word changes but bigger impacts. So policy 1.7 changed from shall impose by 2015 all or part of the 1 to 5 cent local option gas tax to shall consider imposing optional gas tax by 2023. Policy 1.10 is add to development standards the option of other means of shared access, interconnections, as an alternative providing service frontage roads. And this is kind of implementing things that have been occurring on these larger commercial developed sites adjacent to each other, interconnected parking lots and so forth. Policy 1.11, change the basis for parking requirement from parking studies to acknowledge the Institute of Traffic Engineers parking data, as well as the parking studies. Policy 1.12 is change reference from the 2030 cost feasible long-range transportation plan to the updated 2040 cost feasible plan, and to recognize adopted 2040 LRTP, long-range transportation plan. Moving forward, looking at 2.4, that was just an acronym that's getting spelled out in the policy. Policy 2.5, update shared access requirements to refer to other means of shared access and interconnections. And objective 3, change completion date for acquiring all county right-of-way for county collector and arterial roads and mass transit corners within the urban service area, USA, from 2025 to 2035, consistent with the adopted 2040 long-range transportation plan. Policy 3.1, revised to allow general right-of-way width standards to be modified by FDOT or the Public Works Director, provided drainage is adequately handled. Policy 5.5 is dealing with a typographical error. Carrying on to policy 6.2, we're going to change the frequency of meetings to FDOT staff to review various roadway standards from regularly to as needed. So just change for that. And policy 6.4, delete the current policy 6.4 for establishing the Traffic Operations Subcommittee of the MPO Technical Advisory Committee. It's a separate subcommittee determined not necessary, and you're welcome, Commissioner Solari. Policies 6.5, 6.6, and 6.7, renumbered policies, and did some minor text edits to those. Policy 10.1, change long-range transportation plan references from 2030 cost feasible. So we did that. Here's another case. I mentioned that earlier, another one. Proposed amendments. So with the text updates, we looked at the whole element. We had to update the table of contents, numerous maps, various tables. Outdated references were corrected throughout. Looked at statistical data and monetary figures, recent project information. Let me add too that the MPO had a major role in this update, and I do want to thank Jim Mann and Phil Mattson for their contributions to this. It's a lot of work. And with all comprehensive plan amendments, we have to look at one of 4 criteria under policy 4.3. It requires that one of these be met to approve a comp plan amendment. So you can see in the red there that the third criterion, substantial change in circumstances, is being met. And to add to that, 2 bullets, information, references, and some processes are now out of date. The level of service issues arising for 2 roadways, County Road 510 and 37th Street, scheduled for widening and alternative improvements, will increase capacity, but will take time for actual road project construction. So with that, staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend that the Board of County Commissioners adopt the proposed resolution, including the packet, for transmittal of the proposed comprehensive plan text amendment to state and regional review agencies, and announce its intention to hold and advertise a final public hearing at the adoption stage of the plan amendment process, tentatively planned for September or October of 2019.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shute. Any questions for either Mr. Shute or Mr. Bowling?
Yes, I have one. Bill, could you go back 2 slides? Okay, okay, substantial change in circumstances, and then forward one more forward.
Down?
Yes. So change in circumstances, would this be an appropriate place to also mention that if at some point in the future Virgin Trains All Aboard Florida, whatever the name happens to be, if it ever comes through here, that the 32 train daily disruption obviously could have a concurrency effect on the local roadway system, which is a change in circumstances that we have no control over? And if so, what, if any, appropriate language would we need to add, or would that just fall under change of circumstances? But I'd like to have something in there particularly because that frequency will clearly have some interruption. How do you measure it today? It's a little hard to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for staff? There being none, this is a public hearing, so I'll open the public hearing. Anybody from the public wish to speak on this matter? Come on up. Name
He's
and
not public.
address for the record, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I'm not fully prepared. I just heard something that I was going to ask a question about. Policy 1.11, I think, about the parking study plus the ITE parking manual change. Am I getting that right? Is that going to be a stricter requirement for modification, or is it going to be more liberal?
No, it's not going to be stricter. Right now, the way that that's worded is pretty narrowly worded, so we wanted to put the standard that's in there, that we use ITE for generating what our parking, our normal parking requirements are, but it doesn't change the ability for parking studies to come in like the
Okay, so an
LDRs.
individualized parking study
Correct.
would still be,
That's correct. What we just wanted to do is put in there what our basis is for the general tables that we have.
my concern, Commissioners, is you don't need a stricter parking requirement. You need to loosen it up a little bit. I want to make sure we weren't tightening it up.
Yeah, and, you know, Bruce, I agree with you. I think we really shouldn't even have a parking requirement, because the business is gonna put in the parking they need to make their business successful, right? I mean, like, if an Aldi wants to come in and they build a giant store and only have room for 2 parking spaces, they're not gonna be successful. So it's almost like, let them determine how much parking they wanna have for their customers, and, you know, that we don't have to keep wasting space for parking that's not needed.
Yeah, you can say that. I can't say that. But I just want to make sure we weren't going the other direction. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I understand.
Anybody else from the public wish to comment on this matter? One more time for public comment. With that, we will close the public hearing. Commissioners, any comments or direction?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move staff recommendations 1 and 2.
We have a motion from Commissioner Flesher,
Second.
second by Commissioner Adams. Any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman, would the maker of the motion include any language addressing any of the consequences for Virgin trains in the future as other, or is it covered broad enough?
I believe it's covered. It was more apparent that we had the latitude, and staff will monitor accordingly.
Correct. So there are 4 windows each year for doing amendments, and I think in the case of impacts from that, you probably need to, like you mentioned before, you probably actually need to experience, unfortunately, some of those impacts to be able to have the data you needed. But an update can be done, 4 times a year, and an update would be justified if and when circumstances change for that particular item.
You're suggesting stronger language so that
Well, just if there's,
more apparent is.
if any effect from their frequency of the trains causes anything that the local applicant's not responsible for it. The applicant, let's say somebody's doing a project near the US 1 corridor, and the level of service at the time of measuring for the project has the effects of the 32 trains a day, and what does that do to traffic flow to the project, which may cause them potentially to have to do more off-site improvements to mitigate that additional congestion caused by the train.
Right, and I think that the capacity numbers that we use for segments of roadways are not going to be affected by that. It's almost like a local intersection sort of problem that you would have in that particular case. So I don't think there's going to be a case of that affecting capacity that we look at. It's more of an operational issue that's probably not going to bleed down into concurrency standards. But again, kind of see what the impacts are, and it could affect what we wind up doing.
Okay. Since you won't be here.
We good then? You're not leaving the state for 5 years, right?
Don't plan on it.
Okay.
We're good?
Any other comments from commissioners? So the motion was by Commissioner Flesher to approve, second by Commissioner Adams. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you. And we move on to the second public hearing, consideration of a county-initiated land development regulation amendment to Chapter 926 regarding changes to palm credits for canopy trees. Stan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You all have seen this particular item before. It's really the last bit of work, the last recommendation from the Development Review Committee. It involves kind of a small area of our regulations, but it deals with when certain types of palm trees, such as a royal palm or Bismarck palm, that have a a broad spread, kind of a large frond, can count, one of those palms can count as a canopy tree because of its particular coverage, as opposed to having to cluster smaller types of palms to get credit for a canopy tree. The proposed ordinance would continue to allow certain palm species to be used in place of a conventional canopy tree. Right now, our ordinance actually lists out a few of those specific palm types, but it's come to our attention that there's a whole host of species that have the spread at maturity to meet our definition of a canopy tree. And so the proposed ordinance would allow some more flexibility. It wouldn't try to put in an exhaustive list. I'm sure we would wind up missing something if we tried to do that. So it allows a staff review of a proposed species, and we would just look at the characteristics of that particular species. So it provides a little more flexibility in the code. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended 6-0 that you all adopt the proposed amendment, and that's staff's recommendation as well. Be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Dan. Any questions for Mr. Bowling? There being none, this is a public hearing, so I'll now open the public hearing. Anybody from the public wish to comment on this item? Any comments on the new credits for canopy trees item? There be none, we will close the public hearing. Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, go ahead, Commissioner Adams.
I was just going to go ahead and move staff recommendation with the comment that I appreciate that we're making things more flexible and using more common sense in the process. I think we should do that more often in general.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Commissioner Adams, second by Commissioner O'Brien. Any other discussion? There being none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. We move on now to 10-3, consideration of request by Gary Middleton to amend Land Development Regulation, Chapter 971, by changing the maximum building height for self-service storage facilities in the CG General Commercial Zoning District. Mr. Bowling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a request by Bruce Barquette on behalf of a property owner to amend the code. Our current code applies our general 35-foot height limitation to storage buildings that are in our heavy commercial and our industrial districts. The CG district is different. Generally, we don't have storage facilities, but we do allow self-storage facilities in the CG district, which is more of a retail type of zoning district. And we have currently a 15-foot height limitation on self-storage buildings in CG, a special criterion for that. And that's really kind of the narrow focus of this particular amendment. The height issue was discussed actually over a year and a half ago with staff. There was a proposal for a multi-story self-storage facility in a CG district. Staff's reviewed more recently an initial code change by Mr. Barquette on behalf of his client. What we tend to do, because LDR changes are county-wide, a lot of times we wind up suggesting changes with an applicant to make sure that county-wide it applies correctly and fairly, and that's the case here. So staff does support what's being proposed. The self-storage facilities in the CG district, they're subject to special criteria. One of them, again, is a 15-foot height limitation, and that essentially limits them to single-story buildings. Current language was really produced in the early 90s, and for a good reason. An appearance sort of idea that if you had a tall, kind of blank or stark-looking warehouse-type building in a retail district, it would be out of character. And that's really why it's in the code right now. But really, we've looked at a few different things more recently. The CG district sites are subject to the corridor plan requirements that we have that address aesthetics. We also have in this proposed ordinance the idea that where a CG site might be adjacent to residential lots, that we graduate the height so that you don't have a really out-of-scale issue for a CG site that might be next to a residential site. So based on this setback requirement, the building height can progress or get taller up to the 35-foot maximum height with this proposed ordinance. So it accommodates a trend, and we've seen more and more requests for multi-story self-storage. Most of the self-storage facilities we have are not in this district, but some are. It is pretty popular, so We think that this is a way to accommodate that trend, but address, aesthetic and scale sort of issues, and it's a reasonable result. The Planning and Zoning Commission voted 6-0 to recommend that the board adopt the proposed amendment, and that staff's recommendation that you all adopt it, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Stan. Any questions for Mr. Bowling?
I just have one, Stan. It's the setback is from the closest residential lot line
Correct.
and not like a side street that might serve that residential
Correct.
area.
It's the actual lot line.
The actual closest lot line.
Correct, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Bowling? This is a public hearing, so I will now open the public hearing and ask if anyone cares to speak on this issue. Good morning. Name and address for the record, please.
Morning, Commissioners. Joseph Palin, President Black Swan Consulting. I support this amendment 100%. I think it makes a lot of sense, and as long as we stay within our 35 feet, I think it's a good idea. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to speak on this item? There being none, we will now close the public hearing. Commissioners,
Move staff recommendation.
Second.
motion from Commissioner O'Brien, seconded by Commissioner Zork. Any other comments or questions? There being none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Mr. Bowling, well done, and thank you very much. We move on to public notice items, and I'll ask Mr. Reingold if he can read them this morning.
Thank you very much. We have three public notice items this morning. First is a public notice of a public hearing, which will be scheduled for June 18th, 2019. This will be concerning an extension of the temporary moratorium regarding biosolids. We also have a public notice of public hearing scheduled also for June 18th, 2019 to consider amending Chapter 302 of the Indian River County Code concerning tethering. And then finally, our third public hearing is scheduled for June 18, 2019 to consider creating Chapter 319 of the Indian River County Code concerning the retail sale of dogs and cats. Again, those are three public hearings that will be held on June 18th. And with that, I turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reingold. We now move on to departmental matters, and the first one is a matter from Public Works. Award of RFQ number 2019040, CEI Services for 43rd Avenue from 18th Street to 26th Street, and it will be presented by Mr. Spierka. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Rich Berg, Public Works Director. Back in March of 2017, the board entered into a SIGP contract with the Florida Department of Transportation for construction, 50% share of the construction costs for the 43rd Avenue State Road 60 project. As part of that construction, the county agreed to hire a consultant for engineering and inspection services, as this roadway, part of this project is a on-system roadway or a state roadway. In April of 2019, the board approved a ranking for the CEI companies that had submitted, and Consor was our recommendation to the board. On June 4th, last week, we brought to the board an amendment to the agreement. Construction costs have raised considerably. We reached out to DOT in early part of 2019. They concurred, and we provided them a new cost estimate. And DOT agreed and allocated additional funding for the project in the amount of about $6.5 million for their fair share of 50%. The purpose of the engineering and inspection agreement is to provide engineering, inspection, administration, testing, and a bunch of other inspection services and paperwork required by an on-state project, on-system project. The CEI Consort is gave us a price of $2,452,670. After discussions with them, that's the number that we came up with. Funding is available in the optional sales tax road and bridge construction, 43rd Avenue from 18th to 26th Street for $2,452,760. Staff recommends the approval of the agreement with Consor Engineers LLC, authorizing the professional services as outlined in the scope of services, and request the board to authorize the chairman to execute the agreement on their behalf for a lump sum amount of $2,452,760.67.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Any questions for Mr. Speaker? Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rich, is that the 2 million included in the 13.2 million total cost, or is this in addition to?
This is in addition to,
So it's more like 15.3 million than total.
in total cost, yes, sir.
And that doubling of the cost is just because construction costs have gone up?
Yes, sir, we've seen a significant increase, DOT has too. If you look over the last 2 years, it's been about a 40 to 45% increase in construction costs because the economy's moving and the construction companies are struggling to hire people to do projects.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for Mr. Speaker?
Move staff recommendation.
We have a motion by Commissioner Flesher, second by Commissioner Adams. I'll ask if there's anybody in the public who wishes to comment on this issue. There being none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We now go to County Attorney Matters, the acquisition of right-of-way for Phase 3 of 66th Avenue improvements from Glenn C. Besankan. Good morning, Mr. DeBraw.
Morning, Commissioners. Bill DeBrawl on behalf of the County Attorney, please. Bill DeBrawl on behalf of the County Attorney's Office. Before the Commission today, we have the acquisition of the Besankan parcel. The Besankans own 3.36 acres on 66th Avenue, just south of 69th Street. It's an improved parcel with a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. Carport is around in the back. It's in the agriculturally zoned portion of the county, a 1 up to 1 unit per 5 acres. The parcel has been owned by the Besankans since 1975, and Mr. Besankan has lived there for over 40 years. Construction of the 66th Avenue improvements calls for acquisition of 0.87 acres from the Besankan parcel. That would bring the new right-of-way line in very close proximity to the front door of the parcel. It would leave a remainder of 2.49 acres. You can see the Besankan parcel there on your screen. And if I just scroll down, you'll be able to see on the attachment the 0.87 acres that will be used for right-of-way, leaving a remainder parcel of just shy of 2.5 acres. We sat down and talked with the Besankans. The sons represented the father and also had their attorney along with us. We had Public Works Director, myself, and Land Acquisition Agent participating in the settlement discussions. The Besankans inquired as to the availability of the parcel to the south. That would be the Gardiner parcel. You can see it there on the screen. It's a narrow 90-foot wide parcel that was acquired by the county for advanced purchase of right-of-way back in 2006. The purchase price at that time was $250,000. The Gardiner parcel was improved with a single-family house that has now been demolished, and the property is sat vacant for the last 13 years. The Besankans' idea is to go ahead and add the Gardiner party to a portion of the existing Besankan parcel to create 2 equal-sized properties. They would then build a house on the southern part of the property that they would acquire, and this would be for their own living and also more as a caretaker and being in close proximity to their father, who does not want to move from the house that he's lived in for the last 40 years plus. So as far as settlement conference is concerned, we talked about the different advantages and disadvantages of this type of property. Our appraisal assigned a value of $42,100 to the 0.87 acre parcel. Their appraiser was upwards of $400,000. claiming that the property, the Besanken house, would be a total loss. That's not very far-fetched at all in the eminent domain world, where there's a close proximity to the front door of a parcel. Most eminent domain appraisals, including government-hired eminent domain appraisers, will value the house at 0, and so you're starting with a total loss of the house, as would probably be the case in this parcel. So after discussion, we reached an agreement which would entail the following conditions. First of all, that the Besankens would create the 2 equal-sized parcels. This is approved by community development. When you take into account the narrow 0.97 acre Gardiner property and add additional property to it, it takes an existing non-conforming size property and increases the size. Our code provides for something like that. The Gardiner parcel will retain its impact fees credited to the parcel, as with any property that has had a building demolished. That impact fee would run with the land. And lastly, the northern driveway on the Gardiner property would be located, the northern driveway would stay in place. The southern driveway would be pushed down as far south as Public Works and code would allow it. And again, none of those conditions met with any objection by Public Works or community development. The Gardiner property being so narrow in size, 90 feet, you have to consider that in the agricultural zoning, the setbacks are 30 feet from each side, side yard setbacks, so it might be a challenge to go ahead and try and sell the Gardiner property on its own and finagle a house in a rather narrow property. After the right-of-way, the needed right-of-way is removed from the Gardiner property, it would be about an acre in size, 0.97 acres, and that would be conveyed to the Besankens, along with the sum of $200,000 for the needed 0.87 acres of right-of-way. The costs and attorney's fees in this matter, the costs have been negotiated downwards to $18,000 for engineering and land use planner costs, and attorney's fees would be the statutory formula in the amount of $52,107. The attorney waived any special benefit derived from acquiring the Gardiner property, so this is a compromise on his part as well, making the total purchase price $270,107. The settlement would hopefully result in savings to the county as far as an expert witness fees and outside counsel. If we settle early, we don't have to pay anybody, or we don't have to pay outside counsel fees. We don't have to hire our own expert witnesses or spend money that way. So that's what we're thinking of as far as offering the settlement for consideration today, and consideration that it puts an acre parcel back on the tax rolls that has been off for 13 years. Staff's recommendation is to approve the conveyance of the Gardiner property and $200,000 to the Besankens, together with $18,000 in costs to their expert witness and $52,107 in attorney's fees, making a total cost of acquisition of $270,107. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you, Mr. DeBral. Any questions for Mr. DeBral? Commissioner O'Brien.
Bill, going north towards 69th, could you leave it where you were,
Sorry.
please?
Yep.
How many other parcels have we acquired just getting to 69th Street?
We've got the Ryan parcel right here acquired, and the corner parcels up here have been acquired as well.
So there's like 3 more left to get there?
Yes, and we're in negotiations with the Thompsons as far as acquiring that, and that would pretty much satisfy the block that's there.
So, Mr. Chairman, to me, this is the one that breaks the camel's back on these purchases. You know, if you look at the total cost to us, we're giving them a $250,000 parcel of land, plus an additional $270,000 So our total cost for this is $520,000 for less than an acre, and that comes out to just under $600,000 an acre. I don't think we can afford to keep buying land at these prices. And what I would recommend is that, we're probably years from actually building this. If the sons want to live close to their father, I understand that, and maybe we just offer a straight swap with them, the .94 versus the .87, and call that the deal, and then we would agree to the other conditions as far as the split and the lots and the driveways and the impact fees. And then if they don't accept that, I think we'd look at starting to culvert the canal there, because we will not be able to afford these kind of purchases going forward. Everybody on that row is lawyered up now, and it's almost like the attorneys are gonna say, okay, well, this is what I got these folks, I'll get you more on the next one, because the county will keep caving, because we're afraid to challenge any of this. And if we can't culvert the canal, then I would say we drop the whole 69th Avenue and go to 82nd Avenue and do that project, because Dylan sent out a memo last week that DOT and the Sebastian Improvement District are only 50,000 apart on that right of way. I'd rather give the 50,000 towards 82nd Avenue and get that built than to keep getting fleeced for the taxpayers on these right of way acquisitions. But I cannot support 600,000 for an acre of right of way on this project.
I'll note one thing where I have to disagree on your financial analysis. You said that the small piece to the south is a $250,000 parcel.
What we paid for.
I know, but I think there's a big difference between what we paid for it and what the value actually is. And if we look at the piece that we were going to buy here, that was appraised at $42,000. So that I think we have to make that distinction, because we're not giving them $250,000 of value for that. So you can't get up to the $600,000 there, I don't think. I mean, we can say that that's what we are paying for it, but that's not the value those people are receiving. So I think that distinction is important.
I still think it has more value to them than us. And instead of giving it to them and additional money, it should be, we'll just swap you the land parcels even and go forward from there.
That may be the best thing, but I just wanted to make the point on the value. On this one, I'm going to disagree with you, only because I don't think this is the place to put up the wall. We're halfway through this block. I think we should get through this block and then see how many more blocks we have on 69th Street to see what the real cost is, or get some better idea of what the cost is, and then make the determination. Because for that block itself, given that they're halfway through it, it's going to be cheaper even to, I believe, pay these exorbitant prices than it will be to culvert the canal, given the cost of culverting the canal. So that's just a very slight difference of opinion there. I mean, I'm very close to you there. I certainly, it's one of those times when I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I'm going to take a different approach. And believe me, there have been a number of times when I've hit the wall sooner than you, so I certainly understand. I'll be happy to get comments from other commissioners. Commissioner Zork.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Commissioner O'Brien's way of looking at this. The 250 was a take, I believe, back in 2006. Was it a willing seller or was it a take?
It was under the threat of eminent domain.
Okay, so not saying it was worth 250, but that's what we had to pay to get it, essentially. And in this land swap, the front third, roughly, will stay as part of the right-of-way. So if you're allocating the 250 cost that we paid, you'd need to take a third of that off, because a portion of that's going to stay for the future right-of-way use.
Yes, the front third will remain, although the $250,000 was for purchase of the property and the house, so.
Right, okay. If you look to the north of the subject residence, north of the parcel outlined in yellow, and you see that right-of-way line north of that, it's clearly going to be in the front porch. I mean, see that vertical line right there by your cursor. I'm taking that's probably the right-of-way line for that piece.
Yes. It's 156 feet from the east side of 66th Avenue.
So if you take that and extend it down, that puts you into a full take into that 500,000 range for their parcel because of the value of the house that you're taking, especially he's lived there for 40 years. As for culverting, I saw the Public Works Director coming this way, and I shot him a question last week, and I don't think we've gotten to an answer, but a specific answer, but I would safely say if you were able to secure permission to box culvert the lateral, you would be $20,000 a foot, give or take. So 100 feet's $1.5 million. So box culverting is not really a solution or an option because it's just, and that's if you could get permission. If you couldn't afford to box culvert at those types of cost. And Rich, if that's not in the ballpark, I know we've done some smaller piping projects, but when you're looking at piping, box culverting, an 80-foot flowway that has maybe a 50-foot flowway of water in it, just exorbitant costs.
Rich Berger, Public Works Director. Yeah, the cost, we'd have to meet the cross-section because this is a very large canal, it conveys a lot of water. So in verbal discussions with the farms on this issue, we'd have to meet the cross-section that is there. To meet that cross-section, you're looking at a box culvert that's going to cost you about $8,000 to $10,000 a linear foot. I'm not even sure if we can, and we haven't got into the details, I'm not even sure if I can get it delivered. I think we'd have to build it in place, which is going to further increase our cost. So it can be done, anything can be done. The problem is which is the best cost-effective, efficient way to do things. And culverting that canal is going to be very costly.
Thank you for that explanation. I would be supporting staff's recommendation in the negotiation once we get to that point if anybody else would like to. I don't like these high costs, but you have to look at the alternative of when we go through that process, you have all the additional fees and so on, but I think this is trying to make the best of a bad situation with what we have to do in taking. If you put the road in my front porch, I would want full compensation, as I'm sure they would, because that line to the north coming straight down may even go through his front porch. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner O'Brien, I completely understand your point on this. I think that it's always very distasteful to have to spend these types of dollars to complete projects. And, if you extrapolate it out, by the time we get all the right-of-way we need, we probably could have built 5 roads. So I understand the angst there. I also tend to agree with Commissioner Solari in that I don't know if this particular piece is the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I think we're going to probably get into that as we get closer to the 510 area. Do we have all that right of way, Bill?
No.
And there's a lot of those that are houses that are much closer to 66.
This is pretty much the most populated block that we're going to run into for a while, thankfully. So I think there's probably 1 or 2 others where we're coming near the front porch just because they're older structures and they've been there for a while and it was before the zoning codes and before building codes and things like that.
I think this road and this project does have some unique characters to it because of the age of some of the development there. But, that being said, in general, I am a proponent of adding more roads rather than expanding roads we have because it just tends to be a little bit easier. The 82nd Avenue, punching that through, I agree, would be much easier to continue our grid system than to expand something that's already in place because you have the constraints of development. The only thing I'll point out about 82nd is I think they've been arguing over that $50,000 for a couple years now. So I don't know if it's as close as we would like it to be, but I'm as anxious to see that moving forward as well. I just think in the future, when we start talking about road projects and expanding roads, that we need to really think about, we need to think about that much farther out in the future, so we don't end up with these types of situations, because I can think of a couple other roads in the county that eventually we'll need to address, long after we're here and gone, but those commissioners in the future will have the same issues. So that being said, I would be in favor of staff's recommendation. I don't know if there's a motion to that yet.
Yours was not a motion, correct?
No, it wasn't, and I can count to three, but I would just say two final things, and then we can move forward on this. Is one, you can bet those other parcel owners are watching this, and they're going to want to get a better deal than this, and so it's going to continue to escalate as we move forward. And then secondly, Rich, how far is it from the edge of pavement? Because there'll be a bike lane, there'll be a grassy strip, there'll be a sidewalk, the green zone and all this stuff, and landscaping. So about how far is it actually from the edge of pavement, how much buffer is there in there, roughly on the road project?
From edge of pavement, basically the cross-section is just like 49th is now, so it's not very much. Because if you look at 66 now, where we have it 4-lane, there's the curb, there's about 4 foot of green area, there's the sidewalk, and we slope down to the right-of-way line. So you're looking at maybe 10 feet, 12 feet max to the right-of-way line. And if memory serves me correctly, I want to say it's 15 feet to the front of the house or something like that, really close. So those are the numbers. You don't have a big green area.
I just know driving down 66th Avenue now where we widened it, when we were buying those right of ways, the same thing came up. We're too close to the road. The horses will be spooked and all this crap. And the horses are just fine there. They sit there and they look at the car. Actually, they don't even look at the cars. They're eating and doing their stuff, and nothing bothers them. So I think, I understand it is probably going to be close, but once it's landscaped and buffered, I think that's not such a big issue. But I guarantee you those next parcels are going to be more expensive than this.
So that brings me to a good question that you raised. What is that line for you, Bill, in the negotiation? And maybe we don't want to say that, but is there ever a line where we are going through the eminent domain process is going to be more beneficial than trying to come up with a settlement?
My point of view is that it's always is of some value to talk to them, to see where they're going and what they want. If we can comply and try and work out a deal like we have here with the Besankins, that's fantastic. If they're dead set on going to trial and trying to beat us out of every single dollar that we have, fine, then we can go ahead and hire the outside counsel and prepare accordingly. I'm always willing, and Mr. Spirica is always willing to dedicate the time to sit down and talk and see if we can't get someplace with it. It's a much more pleasant experience for everybody involved rather than heading off to court and picking your 12-member jury.
And have we ever won and come out ahead?
Yes.
I mean, I guess you'd have to define coming out ahead.
A win, I guess, would be defined much like the legislature if nothing happens to you. We had a couple of trials where the jury came back much closer to our appraiser's number versus their appraiser's number. But now you have to add in the fact that we have to now pay for all of their expert witness fees and trial preparations and things like that on top of everything else. And so do you end up winning? I don't know. This is cost avoidance to us, and that's the way I try and look at it.
Right.
And my thought in negotiating these agreements is that, if we can put money in the person's pocket rather than the out-of-county expert witnesses and our own witnesses, we might be a little further ahead.
Any other questions for Mr. Brawl or Mr. Spirica? There being none, we now move to climax of this item which we all hate so much. Anybody care to make a motion?
Oh, I'll make a motion to move staff's recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Adams, second by Commissioner Zork. Any other comments? Anybody from the public wish to comment on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Passes 4-1, Commissioner O'Brien dissented.
Thank you.
Now, I will ask if the board has any desire to ask staff to come back to us with a view of the next blocks going north to just see what we may be facing.
I think that'd be great, just a list of parcels to be purchased and whether they're occupied or just, raw land or something.
And I think we ought to look at it on a block-by-block basis to see, because there's a big difference if it's 8 parcels in a block and we don't own 7, as opposed to if we own 7 and just need to get 1. So that, I think that'd be worthwhile. And then when we think about these things, I mean, it may seem odd, but we may decide that we want to slow down purchases until the next recession. I mean, and things like that, because it's clear that not only this right-of-way, but the building costs have accelerated so much in just the last 3 years that the amount of road that we're going to be able to build in the next 5, 10 years is going to be shrinking tremendously. So that, in a perverse way, may give us some leverage going forward if we just tend to take a little different look. And we may end up by saying, look, with 5 parcels, we can end up doing 2 or 3 projects, and that's going to take us out 5, 10 years. So that might influence how we view on those. So we don't need a vote on this, but if there's consensus, I think we'll.
Yeah.
Oh, just on 82nd Avenue, I think has gone through the last 2 recessions, so I don't think it's gotten resolved, and I don't think their price tag has changed, altered.
I don't know, but 82nd also isn't like all the other properties. We have to understand that because it's in the district, and it's very much different. It's a pretty much one-off situation. But 69th is more like the type of things we're dealing with throughout the county in different spots. So if that's the consensus, Mr. Zito, if you will tell Mr. Brown that in his absence, it's always dangerous for him not to be here. We've done this, and I don't think there's any tremendous hurry for it, but in the next months, we'd like the staff to come back with a view of our right-of-way on this project, particularly.
Will do, sir.
Thank you very much. And Mr. DeBrawl, thank you for that. We understand it's probably as difficult for you as it is for us, and you'd probably rather be doing other real estate items, but thank you. And Mr. Speaker, again,
You're
thank you very much. We appreciate what you've done. So with that, we move on to Commissioner's open dialogue. I'll begin with Commissioner Zork.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to pass down each one, take one, and unfortunately, I don't have an extra rock for the clerk, and I'll tell you the story behind these 5 rocks. Paul Westcott spoke at the evening dinner where representatives of all aboard Florida spoke.
Excuse me, you call these rocks? At my house, these are barely pebbles.
Okay. These small handheld size round objects made of stone. Paul Westcott used the David and Goliath example where when he went into battle with Goliath, he took 5 stones, but he only needed 1 to conquer the giant. So this was his token of appreciation and expressing his part of his rebuttal at the dinner that evening, and he asked me to share these with my fellow commissioners, so I have thus passed out your pebble
Thank you.
to you.
No.
And
A piece of the rock.
no other major events to report, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Adams.
Yes, thank you. A few things. One, I just want to thank the Recreation Department for the baseball, for having Fellsmere included in baseball this year in their program. It was fantastic. We did have a lot of people in town that were happy to see games being played out there again, and I think that you're going to have quite the robust sign-up for next year. In fact, they're already clamoring for fall ball, which I know you guys don't do, but you might get a couple of emails suggesting that you do from everybody out there. I've also had a couple of comments from some parents in the North County area about the library and the programming that they're offering this summer for the kids. They've been doing a lot of work, I know, to keep the kids engaged so they don't have the summer slide, but also getting them involved in what's going on at the library, and there's some really cool things there. So I know that's a new library director, so please pass that on to her, that she's getting a lot of kudos in the North County area. Just for the commissioners, the City of Fellsmere's city manager job posting has been posted, so hopefully they'll be able to work through that process in the next couple of months and get that done. So just wanted to let you guys know on that. I also had, for those of you that aren't aware, there is a new owner for the shrimp farm out in Fellsmere. I met with the gentleman. They've changed the name to the Florida Shrimp Company, and they are looking forward to getting that up and going again. They've been in talks with some of the larger distributors in Florida, the grocery stores and those types of things, so they're just trying to get that back on track so we can start having some more Indian River County shrimp being sent around the state. That'll be wonderful. And then lastly, I know Commissioner Flesher and myself were at the Chamber's Tourism Luncheon the other week. There was a great keynote speaker on airport marketing and airport trends and what to do to attract an airline to the area. I know there was a couple of newspaper articles that kind of followed up on that, but it was a very fascinating conversation, and I think it'll be a great catalyst for discussion at the TDC meeting that's coming up this month. So I'll keep you posted on that, and thank you guys. That's what I got.
Thank you. I've got one item. I was able to go to a meeting last week, which is always exciting. And
I hope it was a big committee meeting, Bob.
it was actually, but not a regularly scheduled committee. This was a one-off meeting. You know, I certainly don't want to be accused of starting to go to committee meetings that occur regularly.
Spreadsheet handouts?
But this meeting was with the Florida Department of Transportation Secretary at the Fort Pierce FDOT office. A number of FDOT employees, as well as Secretary Tebow, met with officials from Martin, St. Lucie, and Indian River counties. We did discuss the train at one point and rail safety. It is clear that there's a lot more that needs to be done to make the train safe, and FDOT may finally be waking up to this fact. We'll note that that the train now has 22 deaths, and in the first 3 months of the year, the FRA website notes that there have been 19 deaths in the state of Florida by rail, 8 of them by the Bright Line. I mean, so they're absolutely the most successful killer of people by train in the state of Florida. We all know that from the start, Brightline has pushed the idea that they're coming and that this is a done deal, and we know that it is not a done deal. Lately, the death train people have pushed the idea that construction is imminent, but the meeting noted 2 important things. First is that construction plans are not complete. Second is that permits necessary to do the work at railroad right-of-ways, railroad crossings, have not been issued. Permits have not been issued for the crossings at Indian River County, at St. Lucie County, or at Martin County. And they can't do much before those permits are issued. So for me, it was very important that it wasn't just Indian River County that was saying this, that we were joined by St. Lucie and Martin County. And I think everybody should be excited about a coming event. Next week, Rich Spierker is going to be back before this board, and he's going to discuss his meeting with FDOT officials where they went and visited every crossing in Indian River County. And he had a long list of over 163 items, which were questions and problems with rail safety.
Did he turn it into a spreadsheet for you?
No, but he did turn it
It's
in.
a good opportunity.
You know,
Rich.
it
Don't
was.
miss it.
A lot of photographs.
It's actually, one of those things on the definition of spreadsheet. If you use the broader definition, actually, yes. So he had all 163 items in what, you could call a spreadsheet, but, stretching the phrase. And it was very nice, though. It was colors and everything, and he made sure that FDOT got a copy of it.
Good.
And it was very nice when the Secretary Tebow at the meeting asked, well, have we gotten anything from you? Yes, sir, it was in the mail yesterday. It was a very nice response. So that was really good. So still, I've got to say that I don't think that FDOT quite has the level of concern it ought to have for a rail system that in its very short life already has 22 deaths. And I don't think that we can stop pressing things until they actually are fully embracing the safety problems and the problems of a train going through our community at 110 miles an hour. So with that, I'll go on to Commissioner O'Brien.
Mr. Chairman, first I'd like to make a motion that we officially rename Virgin Trains the Death Train and use that in all future correspondence and conversation.
I will give up any rights that I may have to that and offer that to them at a deal much less than Richard Branson offered for the use of a silly name for a train like Virgin. I mean, with all those deaths, it can't be a Virgin. So but anyway, I digress.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, Commissioner Zork with his pebbles and stuff is a tough act to beat, but I think I've got something even better. And to really make it special for you, Mr. Chairman, I actually have a PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, geez.
So if Scott will cue this up. So back May 24th, I had the opportunity to tour the McCarty Ranch. It's a water quality project sponsored by the city of Port St. Lucie. Go ahead, Scott. Basically, they've purchased the land, and they're going to have 7 reservoirs that will take water from the C-23 canal and also capture the local rainfall. So they're estimating just under 9 billion gallons of water a year that they will be able to retain and treat and improve the water quality. They use some utility funds to purchase the land, and then they're using state acquisition or appropriations to build the actual improvements. And they are looking at this as a future water supply project. I will point out that they spent about $5,000 per acre for the land. For comparison, I looked at what FP&L paid in our county for their solar farm land, and they paid $500 to $7,500, and I wish we could get right away at that price, so I'll just say that. They are projecting that they will remove 89,000 plus pounds of nitrogen, 18,000 plus pounds of phosphorus, and the C-23 only takes water coming off the drainage basin of the ag land out there. It does not get any Lake Okeechobee water, okay? So that's they actually, part of this preserve, they have camping, a disc golf course, and some recreational facilities there. This is the southern half of the property. The site labeled number 1 there is one that's now completed. The P there is their pump station. And then on the bottom of that, you can see the C-23 canal right there. And there is a canal that connects the C-23 up to that pump station. One of the things they've run into here is while they have completed the physical improvements, they're still waiting on a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. So here they are trying to do the right thing, remove nutrients, and they're tied up in regulatory bureaucracy paperwork, which I'm sure the chairman will appreciate that. All right. So currently they're using an existing diesel pump that was on the property when they bought it. It's an old citrus grove. That pump there can do about 15,000 gallons per minute. And that canal right behind the gentleman there is the one that leads down to the C-23. They have 2 other pumps so they can do an additional 8,000 gallons per minute, so they can crank out about 20 to 23,000 gallons per minute. That's on top of the berm looking out into the impoundment area, so just kind of give you a little bit of a feel, just kind of remember where that stick is. Okay, Scott? And that's the outfall, and again, keep an eye on that stick. And then on the outfall, they put in these blocks to disrupt the flow of water so that they're not eroding the canal there, okay? And they expect to flood that reservoir up to about the 33.5-foot mark, so a little bit above the head of that gentleman standing there. That will be the water level of that particular reservoir holding the water there, okay? And that's a look to the south, just again looking out over the area that'll be flooded. They have a water quality testing station there, and then finally looking to the north. So that's their project. They hope to continue those other sales as they get acquisition or appropriation money, and they're working hard to remove the nutrients. So I thought it was kind of a neat project.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Brien.
You're welcome.
Mr. Reingold, I'm going to need a resolution banning PowerPoints during the Commissioners' open dialogue. Mr. Zito.
Just one announcement, sir. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that for those of you attending the Florida Association of Counties annual conference, that this Thursday, our county administrator will be invested as the president of the Florida Association of County Managers. And I think he's just entering his 3rd year of service in this capacity. I think it's a tremendous honor, and I didn't want it to go unannounced.
Thank you.
Please congratulate Jason Brown when you have a moment. Thank you.
Commissioner Fleischer.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and, somebody else said there was a tough act to follow, but this guy's giving out rocks. You're doing what you did with the debt train. Peter brings in a presentation.
Adams was pretty slack here today.
It was soft,
I'm
but,
glad you guys have risen to the occasion with Commissioners' Open Dialogue.
but I want you to know that I truly appreciate what Commissioner Adams said about the airport, and I would have brought that up because that was quite the presentation. And I think we were on the front row seat on it. But I want to bring thanks. I want to bring thanks to the table. I don't know if anybody's noticing, but I'm getting more and more comments, positive comments about our facilities, the appearance, whether it's in front of the library, it's a recreational area. So I want to thank Mike Zito, Kevin Kerwin, Rich Spirka, and the entire team that they have out there, because things are starting to look a lot better, a lot more spruced up. And I just want to pass that on. We need to let the whole team know that their efforts out there and where the direction's going. Maybe it's a better economy. We've found a few more dollars to hit things that we haven't been able to hit because of a lack of funding. But things are looking better. I don't know if you all agree, but when you go out to a facility, you're seeing some new items or a new appearance. So, but thank you. And the other comment was, as far as your trains, I'm going to reach out to Rusty, and maybe they want to do a little nose art on the trains. They can do their confirmed kills, and it's like they did during the war. They can have little circles.
I'd like to see the skull and crossbones. I think it'd be appropriate at this point.
Whatever they choose, I mean, just something to identify and let the public know on their value in the community.
Excellent idea. So let me know what Rusty says.
I'm going to reach out.
Thank you. And with that, we're finished with Commissioners' Open Dialogue. We'll move to Special Districts and Boards, Emergency Services District, approval of property lease extension for temporary location of Fire Rescue Station Number 7.
Move staff recommendation.
We have a motion by Commissioner O'Brien, seconded by Commissioner Adams. Any comment on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. And with that, thank you. We are adjourned.